This is the meeting of the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. It is November 7th already. And we are here to um, talk about a lot of different things, but I wanted to start off by just grounding us and giving us a few minutes to reflect on, think of something that was really nice or positive that happened today. Just think about something nice that happened. And if you feel comfortable, drop it in the chat so we can appreciate that. I think it's helpful to remember there are good things when we're dealing with a lot of issues to try to combat climate change and make everything more equitable. Hi, Alex. I'm glad you could join us.
Hi.
Welcome. We're being quiet right now because we were taking a moment to reflect on something positive or nice that happened today or in the last 24 hours and put it in the chat if you feel comfortable doing that. Just it's nice to think of nice things. We're going to be talking about the climate and we'll start off on a positive note about there are many good things out here. All right. These are some nice things. I like this. There's like a bug theme going on here. Worms and bugs and praying mantises. All right. So hopefully everyone's had a few moments. Thanks for taking that little breath with me. So I'm gonna move into our main agenda and uh, I'm gonna share my screen, but also so Sophie, I think you dropped it in the chat, but maybe not everyone was here. Do you mind dropping that link again also?
Yeah.
But I will just quickly share our screen to show what we're doing. All right, so hopefully you're seeing the agenda on my screen. So real quick, we're in the introduction section here, and I think we maybe still, do we have a quorum? We need at least 6. I'm not sure we do. Do we have 6? No, we do. Someone else can count, but I'll go through this real quick. If we have a quorum, we'll accept the minutes or not, your choice. We'll get some climate action updates from Sophie. And then hopefully, I think only Claire is here from the Claire, Beverly, Abby, Denise group. So hopefully, Claire, you're feeling able to talk a little bit about this outline that you all put together. And then we're going to just talk about the outline and then how to move forward with this. This is part of the revision to the climate action plan, and we have a chapter that we need to sort of fill out and update. So we have some really cool ideas on the table. Yeah, and then we will have some time for public comment, and then we wanted to hear from any liaisons to other subcommittees. What have you been experiencing? Have there been issues that have come up that you're not sure how to handle? Were there things that you wanted to bring to our attention? Anything really. This is your time. So that would be the last portion of our meeting. So any questions about that or anything? And is somebody who can see the full participant list able to tell me if we have a quorum to do the minutes approval?
We do not have a quorum. I think if we get 2 more members.
Okay. So
I'll keep track of that. And do we want to designate a note taker?
say that again.
Do we want to pick a note taker?
That would be great. Is anybody willing to do that?
I'm happy to help with that.
I'm not a good facilitator note taker combo. So
Yeah, nobody should be.
But Sophie, I think you're up next though.
So okay.
Yeah, so we'll skip over the minutes. If we get a quorum later, we can review those. That's my suggestion. But we should definitely keep going and get your updates and everything. So that'd be great.
Let's move forward. Keep an eye on quorum. Okay, so I have a couple of updates to share. And if you have a question along the way, feel free to just interrupt me and raise your hand, or we can do that afterwards. So you might remember that back in the summer, this subcommittee worked on kind of some recommendations about making the public comment process a little bit better, a little bit more welcoming at the subcommittee level, and that was approved and shared with subcommittees. And ideally, the subcommittees have been using that and implementing that. It might be interesting, actually, in the liaisons updates to hear from you all how prevalent public comment has been at the other subcommittee meetings. I tend to not be there, so I'm not actually sure, like, how many people are commenting, and if you notice if any of the like systems that we kind of put forward in the best practices, how they're going. So this coming November, this November that we're in right now, there is a council meeting at which they're going to talk about how those practices have been going at the subcommittee level and consider whether they want to adopt that for the council as a whole. So just I just flagged that that's on the docket. All right. Next thing is I wanted to correct something that I had said. I can't remember if it was last month's meeting or the meeting before, but somebody had asked me about per diems, and I had said that I was under the impression that Agency of Natural Resources would be pushing for per diem increases, and I learned that I was mistaken, and that the opinion is that that needs to be done as like across multiple agencies. And that could certainly be a topic of discussion for the council. And so I just wanted to correct the record because I had given false information. So that's that. I wanted to share an idea from you all that Chris Campany shared with me. Chris is a climate counselor. He was on the climate council for the original action plan, and was off the council for a time and has just been reappointed. He works for the Wyndham Regional Planning Commission and has the seat that represents municipal governments on the climate council. He has a great suggestion of transitions meeting directly with long-term recovery groups at some point. And I actually just talked with the one in the Northeast Kingdom. Their acronym is CURVE. I think it's something like Kingdom United Resilience and Recovery something group. It was a great conversation. They were just curious about what the Climate Action Office and the Climate Council does. But there are many other long-term recovery groups that are helping at that sort of local regional scale, the most flood impacted communities get to that long-term recovery state. So that could be something for Just Transitions to consider. And that gave me the idea of, maybe if Just Transitions has a meeting with a long-term recovery group or the person who kind of like coordinates all of them, or like, I don't know, like a communicator between all of them. Perhaps that could in future be one of those Just Transitions moments that happens at the climate council meeting. One other thing I will for you all is that input sessions are happening. There have been 2 so far. The buildings and thermal input session happened last week, or 2 weeks ago, actually. And the transportation input session happened today. We'll be following up with all the results of those. So just a reminder that Just Transition Subcommittee members are welcome to go to those and to also share them with your networks if there are people who you think would be interested. I think those were all of my updates, unless anybody has questions, or Kelly, if you think of anything I might have left out.
Just registered for the one tomorrow, the resilience and business one. Which is, yeah, I forget the title of it. Close that window, but yeah. I'm excited about that one. And so I think we could just like register online. You go to the calendar and you can register. So if there are any that are coming up in the near future, if you can drop those in the chat, those links, just so we're aware. That'd be awesome. Because yeah, this is a great way to hear from the public. I got to go to an in-person meeting and hear from a lot of members of various New American and former refugee communities, and hear their stories about what they're experiencing. And it was really cool, really powerful. So this is they're just really, I'm really, really pleased about the level of engagement and the type. And I think that being there, if you can and you're available, is just so nice, because you can hear directly from people what they're experiencing. So this one, I'm the representative of the small business community on the Climate Council, so I'm very much going to this business one to hear from other small businesses in a different forum from what I normally hear. But also, I think a lot of us are really focused on the resilience thing, and that's going to be something that's not as quantitative. And I think Chris Campany's idea, that's, I think, a cool opportunity for us that I wouldn't have known about. So I'd be happy to think about that further. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. I don't know. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for the update, Sophie. So gonna move into the next thing would be, you feeling prepared, Claire? Because you're it. your cohort's all bailed on you. Okay. Are you able to share with us about what this draft was, and like give some background? I missed the last month's meeting, so I'm also feeling like I don't fully have a background, but hopefully other people here were present for that and know more about it. But if you want to share about the new chapter and the sort of outline that you all put together, and then we can give, you know, can give some feedback and talk about that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my screen in a minute, but maybe just to quickly refresh what we talked about at the last subcommittee meeting. The conversation was really about, in the last climate action plan, there was a relatively brief chapter that was written by the Just Transition Subcommittee, which talked about the work the subcommittee had been doing to build equity into the climate action plan as we work to ensure that a just transition occurs, as we work to meet the GWSA goals. So at the last subcommittee meeting, we had, I think, we had the start of a robust conversation about like what that chapter could look like moving forward in the new climate action plan. And then, which I think resulted in a lot of notes that then Abby, Denise, Beverly actually ended up not coming to our meeting, but reviewed the draft after we met. But the four of us kind of took as a small task group and tried to formulate into kind of the beginning of what a new chapter could look like. So that is kind of where it stands now, and I'm happy to talk through the various sections and what we hope is reflected based on the conversation the subcommittee had at the last meeting, and then happy to take feedback, and knowing that we're missing a number of subcommittee members, we could also probably circulate this for folks to provide written feedback, and also if anyone here just needs a little bit longer to chew on it, I feel like that's often me. So share my screen. Can folks see the Word document? All right. I can no longer, well, I can see some of you. Not you.
Yeah. Wait, we're seeing your screen. Looks good.
Yeah. Feel free to flag me if someone raises their hand and I miss it. But so I think the objective was to still keep the section pretty concise and to the point, but we really tried to take, I think, all the thoughts that came out of the last meeting and organize them into sort of a coherent story of ultimately, like, what are we doing and why is it important? What was done in the last climate action plan that we were building off of? What did we try to address, like on some of the challenges that we faced? And then what's the work left to do? I think just as like a quick overarching synopsis of what we hope we captured here. But we thought we would start kind of with a little bit of opening context, which would reflect sort of two different pieces. The first being, what do we mean when we say equity? The last subcommittee meeting, there was, I think, a pretty robust discussion around this topic. We know that we did define it in the last chapter we wrote. I think there's a definition of it also in the guiding principles, but I know the question came up last kind of subcommittee meeting, or maybe not the question, but just like the topic of how important language is, and is the definition we actually have kind of accessible and like representing. So we thought, we don't have everyone here, but there could be a conversation within the subcommittee about if we want to maintain, kind of keep on going with the current definition we have, or members have kind of an alternative definition we might want to put forward that maybe is more plain language. And then the second part of the context being kind of why this work is important, why Just Transitions exists, what we are here to do. And this, I think, was really responsive in part to some of the comments Denise had mentioned about really bringing data into the picture to kind of showcase almost as like a finding section of like where are we seeing inequities today kind of in the work, knowing that is information that may also be reflected in some of the subsequent chapters in the CAP, whether, various subcommittees may tee that up as they present recommendations, but it kind of felt like it went well with the context of like, what are we doing? And that could be either based on quantitative data, like from the recent housing needs assessment, but also maybe some of the quotes from like some of the public engagement efforts that Sophie and the CBI team have been leading that really like highlight some of the challenges that Just Transition seeks to center in its work or this work. The second two sections really focus on kind of the last climate action plan. The first being kind of, this is where we were, talking about the fact that we developed the guiding principles and the assessment tools, and then started to work on public engagement were kind of the two examples that we had talked through. We may have other ideas we want to add as a subcommittee, and then kind of reflect on some of the gaps, the ability to actually use the tools we created, the ability to do public engagement in a meaningful way that I think the subcommittee really wanted to do it, some of the challenges we faced. And then segue into a section on how we tried to address at least some of those challenges. So thinking about what we've done to improve the timing and process, updating the tools, kind of like the one we just put together to help the subcommittees actually walk through some of the assessment questions, and then, enhancing the capacity to do meaningful public engagement. Sophie, this is a place where we weren't sure if there was going to be another section specific to the work that the Climate Action Office has been doing with CBI, or if like this would be the right place for that, but it felt like at least touching on it here as something that was responsive to the challenges made sense. And yeah, so we brainstormed a number of things we could talk about in terms of ways we tried to really build off of the challenges that the last Just Transitions subcommittee, but also I think the process to develop the CAP writ large struggled and how we tried to address it in this iteration. Including kind of, consulting with other subcommittees. I know at the last Just Transition subcommittee meeting, we talked about that really Just Transitions isn't the only subcommittee responsible for building equity into the CAP. And so it felt like maybe there would be some work we could do either through the liaisons or reaching out to the other subcommittees to actually ask them, like, could you summarize for us the ways you've worked to build equity into your processes? And that could also fit into this section. And then I think this was our last section. We thought, I think this was something Beverly had brought up in the last meeting. We wanted to make sure we honored, but like highlighting that the work is not yet done and there are still challenges and stumbling blocks in place, and felt like this would be the section that would kind of tee up like the work to come for the subcommittee and other subcommittees as, the next iteration of the CAP is contemplated, even though that may be 4 years away. So, and we had, brainstormed a list, which definitely may not be complete and would welcome feedback. So I think that was, again, just like we were trying to tell kind of that story. Why are we here? What's already been done? How have we tried to improve the process and what's left to do? But would really welcome feedback from those here, and obviously we'll work to get feedback from those who aren't. But yeah, free to take questions or comments.
First off, I'll say this is seems like you put a lot of thought into this, and I really, at first glance, this looks like something I couldn't have written myself, and I'm impressed. I'm very happy. And I wanted to throw in one little thing about something we've talked about, probably more in like steering committee meetings, is about this outline and how the revised climate action plan will be put together, is wanting to weave, personal climate stories from people into it and have little sections. And so I think this is something that Jane saw in some of the like thing, and I think it was the main climate action plan, but just like it's beautiful. It has this, it's easy to read, it's easy to look at. And so it has little sections that are sort of like call outs that summarize or have a personal story. And I think what we could be thinking about as we move through this is having some of the other subcommittees have their how we how we wove equity into what we were doing and have it in their section, not all the equity stuff in our section, right? So like make sure it's dispersed throughout the whole plan, but maybe as like a little sidebar, so it's a call out, like it's called out from the rest of the text or something. And it could be also in our section, but I think that would be a good way to make sure that it's very clear that this is not only housed in this one subcommittee, right? And that it's part of the whole process and we're just here to support. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. And Callie, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've been having some computer issues, my Zoom crashed, I had to come back in. So I guess one question for Claire, since you're the only one from the drafting folks here, is part of this like short chapter at the end, or is this also a space for making recommendations the way that some of the other chapters of the CAP have recommendations, or is this really just sort of a like, content like reflection chapter on, as you've outlined in the outline here, but is there sort of an intention that that this chapter and that we're making recommendations in this section as well as providing context and reflection?
That's a good question. I did not review the other chapter right before this meeting. I do feel like maybe Danielle or Kelly or Carrie. I do feel like we made some broad recommendations last year, the last CAP around, like I remember at least talking about making recommendations around like the need for greater like education and communications. I would have to go back and check. I imagine if we did, they lived in this chapter. But that's a good question. I think we could, I'd look to Kelly or Sophie, I don't know, but I think we could certainly talk about it if there are recommendations we want to make.
One thing I would say is that, my hope is that our recommendations were embedded in the other chapters because we were helping to bring that equity voice to the table as those other plans. Like we had liaisons and we were like there. And my hope would be that that those things were in there and they were built in. But it does, again, the flip side of what I was saying earlier, we could also have examples of examples of how our subcommittee's liaisons or whatever, like that other subcommittees, we could put in our chapter things that other subcommittees have done that we could point to, like this is the equity work that they're doing, and so pull things from their chapters into ours and put things from our chapter and like make sure that they're also called out in their chapters, like just to like cross-reference and say it's connected and show it in a more visual way, right?
I guess I was also thinking more like that when I meant recommendations, I meant sort of like some procedural recommendations, like not necessarily like the actions and strategies that like the drafting committees are working on, but more like the per diem should be increased. Things like that, or even just, calling out or some recommendations to sort of mitigate the time commitment that is being asked of, committee and subcommittee members. And recognizing that there's just a lot of work falling on, people who, either the per diem, is maybe not sufficient to compensate them for the amount of work that's being expected, or if they're, state employees or people who are, able to do this as part of their job, there's still a lot, being asked of them. And so if there's like, Claire, I have some sense of how busy you are, so I have no idea how you found the time to put this together. But, you know, just if there's some sort of acknowledgement or call out on that, or a recommendation of like ways, um, you know, to think about in future updates how to take some of that load off, either by upping capacity at the climate action office with more staff, or having a consultant, like we have a public engagement consultant with CBI right now, having a consultant that leads some of the drafting process to take some of the load off. So like those kinds of recommendations in my mind were maybe something that could go in this, that isn't necessarily like a climate action, but more like a capacity building, you know, and like procedural equity issues. So I don't know if that's appropriate, but that's just what came to mind.
And I'll just
Uh,
comment, Callie, I appreciate that, although this was definitely a team effort. So we had one very productive working meeting and then a little bit of follow-up. So, but thank you.
And yeah, and thanks for re-articulating that, because that's definitely something that we can and probably should speak to, the all the things you just raised, and you know exactly where the venue is for that. We could probably ask experts that know more than I do, but I do think that those are equity concerns that we should raise and just try to figure out where to raise them in the right way. And we have talked about the per diems a lot, just not being sufficient, but apparently that's like a statewide issue or something that we have to like take it to someone higher up than we currently talk to most of the time. So all right, let's see. I don't know how hands go. Sophie, then Matthew.
I'm happy to let Matthew go first as
Okay.
one of the members.
Yeah, I don't know if the like second person on my screen is the second person you raised your
Yeah,
hand.
it is
So
Matthew. If you can hear me.
yes.
Yeah, internet issues out here. So yeah, I put in the chat. Yes, it's not good out here. I know. Oh, technology these days. Yeah, I do agree with the per diem of how we're gonna raise that, because I'm seeing this across Vermont statewide. It ain't just in this sector. It's like, Vermont's trying to save money as much it can, and it's hurting the vast majority of our work here, because it's better to save money than trying to help. But it's a double-edged sword and a caveat to the problems that we have, and this is what I'm seeing across the state, and it's worrisome, because you're talking about capacity, but also about how about availability, and how about that flexibility to do this work. How about those scenarios that enshrine into what we're talking about, the whole per diem? I do think we should increase, those. Like I said, everybody should get, in my opinion, the whole equity that revolves around everything. Without it, we can't do our jobs correctly. And you expect people to do this on their own time for free, which, that free is not everything. And we should respect the individuals that are doing this hard work. And if they need to be compensated more, then they should. It's like, everybody wants to be compensated, for the work they're doing, and how hard and involved they're in. Believe me, sitting on 12 subcommittees across the state of Vermont and lead 2 of the chairs of the state of Vermont is not easy work. But if I don't stand up for what I believe in, then I'm not protecting the people that I care about the most. So if you look at it in that type of, way of trying to promote, more compensation, I'm in full support, because I do think people should get paid for what they're doing and shouldn't be taken advantage of. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And for anybody who maybe isn't familiar, the per diem for people who are on subcommittees or climate council members who are not already members of the state, paid by the state for their job. The per diem is $50 for a meeting like this. Okay, not so bad, 2 hours. But for any work outside of the meetings, so a drafting group, or when I'm a co-chair doing a planning meeting, that is $6.25 an hour. So if you have a minimum wage job that you have to miss to do this, you're getting paid less. So this isn't great. So this is why we're bringing this up, because it really does perpetuate this sort of the inequity of the status quo. So yeah, if we want to hear from all Vermonters and we want a diversity of voices and participation, this is not necessarily going to work. $50 for a meeting, yeah, maybe. Any outside work, you can't feed your kids on that. So, to put some context. So yes, Sophie, yes, please go.
Yeah, really appreciate everything that's been said. I had two thoughts. I feel like I had another thought aside from that, but I'm remembering it. One of them is, and I think this was Sam's idea on the theme of kind of integrating, like not just having equity and justice within the chapter. I think it was Sam who brought up this idea of kind of in the actions that are put forward in the other chapters, or maybe it would be more in the appendixes where all the actions are listed in much more detail, that there could be kind of a star or some kind of visual marker for actions that have an especially strong nexus with climate justice and creating just transitions, and that the Just Transition Subcommittee, once the actions are drafted up, could go through those actions and indicate the ones that are really important from a just transitions perspective. That recommendation really stuck with me when Sam or whoever else, pardon me if I'm missing the person, brought that up. So I wanted to remind us of that. And in terms of somebody asking about this chapter including recommendations, I'm not the one to say yes or no for sure, but and maybe that's something, I don't know, Kelly, to elevate to the steering committee level of like, and I think it makes my 2 cents on it is like it makes sense to integrate with the other actions, but like Kelly, like you said, if there are these kind of recommendations that are kind of cross-cutting or procedural or kind of just an umbrella perspective, that would make sense in the chapter. And then the last thing I was thinking, just as everybody's talking about all the hard work and the undercompensation and just how much the subcommittees have given and put into this work and how much the council will be doing. I don't know if this was in the original plan, but I wonder about a gratitude section, not just for the work that you all are doing, but also for the people who we're engaging with for showing up and sharing their piece and trusting us with their stories. And yeah, something for us to think about.
I love that so much, Sophie. What a cool idea. Any other thoughts related to this document that Claire shared? And Claire, it would also be great to send it out to the full, because I don't think everyone's seen it already. So sending it out to the full subcommittee for other like written feedback or something would be great. But anyone on the call on the subcommittee, other thoughts this moment? Not the last chance we'll have. And if not, the next thing would be, so our goal is that we can get something drafted and have something ready to approve in February. So that's pretty soon. So the next step would be how we are going to approach our plan to actually draft this. So obviously I do think getting more feedback from people who aren't here tonight is obviously a good idea. And then so, we'll want people to help work on writing this. Feels funny to talk about this when we talk about the not super sufficient compensation for this kind of work. But to help draft different sections. So my thought now is that we could probably have like a general conversation about how we think this could work, but we probably need a little bit more feedback from folks who aren't here and a little bit more time to sit with us to know what the sections are. But like on a higher level, the structure that we were proposing would be that we'd be like, these are the sections. Who feels like they want to take a first draft of this, and sign up for, I could take a first stab at this section. And it could be a tiny little bit, it could be a whole, we'll just try to fill it out and make sure that we have people who feel like they can give it a shot, and then that'll be a first draft, and then we can, there are going to be some things that are going to depend on what we're hearing from other subcommittees, right? Like, so we can't necessarily write all of it, but some of the intro stuff and for the future stuff can probably be written now. And then anything that's more specific to the revision of the plan would need to probably wait on some new information coming in from other subcommittees. And then, so when things have been drafted, we could maybe do like other small group sessions to work through, edit together. And the hope would be that maybe we could do that later this, like at the end of this month or something. And then hopefully we can also get some information from other subcommittees that they would like to contribute to this chapter, or, stories from them. And then that could help fill out some of the stuff that really is dependent on hearing from those other subcommittees and how they're doing and how they're incorporating equity into their work. And then really let everybody look through this, read it, and then come to hopefully the January meeting so that we can all have read it, discuss the draft, and then hopefully approve it in February. So it feels like a tight timeline. But that was the hope and the goal. And that's partly based on the fact that the final thing needs to be in front of the Climate Council so the final revision is due July 1st of the Climate Action Plan. And if we want people to be looking at our chapter, we should probably get it to them sooner rather than later, but we also want to make sure that it's relevant and up to date. So that's sort of where this comes from. And I think there's also, I don't have it in front of me, but I think there's also like a time by which we want to bring it to the Climate Council because of when they're asking people to have revised chapters. So I'd like to just open it up to if people have suggestions, if this seems like a reasonable way to go about it, once we have a chance to hear from people who aren't here, and then we can maybe and this could be done by email, just like respond to, 2 people, we'll collect names of who wants to do which section or whatever, and that won't violate the open meeting law of just like, I'll take this section, and then we can sort of organize into small groups to then go over people's drafts and come to some new information. Mona is here. Hi, Mona.
Hello. Sorry for being late. I was in another meeting. I'm really sorry.
I'm just so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we were just talking about, so Claire, Denise, Beverly, and Abby had worked on an outline for we have a new sort of revised chapter that we're going to be preparing for the new Climate Action Plan revision. And they came up with a really great outline, and we were just talking about it, got some really good ideas from the rest of the group here. And then the next step is, how are we going to actually go about writing this and making it, finalizing it. And so, we had the idea of just having a couple people take a stab at different sections, do a little draft, and then come together with other folks to try to flush it out, get feedback, and then putting it together. So sort of this, like, it's like a Lego project, maybe. I don't know. Little bricks here, little bricks there. So I was hoping for some thoughts of people like that seems like that would work and how we make that happen. So Danielle, go ahead.
I just had a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So this chapter is essentially like what we put in the last cap for the guiding principles and scoring rubric. This is to replace that.
So it wouldn't replace the guiding principles. We also had a couple of pages in there, if I recall, that sort of explained what we had done in our process. So it wouldn't replace the guiding principles, but it would enhance it. I don't think those are going away.
Okay.
And that sounds, yeah, and Sophie's nodding. Okay. Yeah, thanks for asking that, because that people have been like, you're replacing them. No.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there, like, one of the things was like the definition of equity and making it more plain language. Like I think there are ways they could be revised if we wanted to go that deep, but also I think we can, the improv, classic improv, yes, and I think we can enhance them and add to them. So Callie.
So if I remember when, I think it was at the last meeting, we looked at the chapter as it currently was developed for the previous cap, and it wasn't very long, if I can recall. It was just like a handful of pages. I think it would be helpful to like get a sense of like the ideal like length for some of these sections, and that could help with maybe people taking on, like, speaking for myself, if like I'm much more likely to commit to a section if we're talking like a couple of paragraphs, like less than a page, versus this is a section that is, in order to get through all the content, needs to be like several pages long. I think while we can't know for sure like the exact length of each of these sections, I think it would just be helpful to get a sense of like, oh, what you're committing to when you're drafting this section is a few paragraphs, so that it's not an intimidating workload for everyone who is already very busy.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, Sophie just dropped it into she dropped the full climate action plan in, but she said page 48 is building equity into the climate action plan and ensuring a just transition. So I think it's 3 pages plus 1 line on the 4th page. So it's not long. I think we could, so we can decide also if there's more we feel we need to put into it, we can do more. I don't think anyone's going to tell us we can't. The original climate action plan was like 300 something pages, so if we want to have 5 pages, I think there's room for that. And then the guiding principles are also their own section, and unless we decide we need to change something about them, I think everyone's happy for those to be there, stay as they are. We put a lot of work into them. But I think what we get to do now is a little bit of context setting, a little bit of clarifying, or talk about historical things, talk about what we've been doing for the last 3.5 years, since the last one was it's only been 3 years, but yeah, since the last one was released into the wild. And also I like that looking forward piece, like where are the gaps that I think you said Beverly was the one who suggested talk about what we still need to work on. So that I think is probably I think that's where we are, and it can take as many pages as we need, but it does not need to be like a thesis paper. It can be pretty simple. And I also think that if we get to an outline that we're happy with, I think that we'll see, oh, I would be happy to write this one section. That is something I feel very comfortable with. And then other people would be like, oh, I wouldn't touch that one, but I want to do this one. And so I think we could probably split up the work and do the whole many hands make light work thing. But yeah, no, it's not, this is not like a thesis paper. This is mostly just trying to get ourselves, and again, in the name of plain language and making things clear and easy to understand, shorter is usually better. So I think we should go for that. Yeah, Claire.
Sorry, my mouse is dying, so sometimes I have to click a button like 7 times before it clicks. Super fun journey I'm on with my mouse. But I was going to say, I know we're also missing a number of subcommittee members today, so when I send out the draft, I'm happy to, I don't know if we have a deadline for when we would like people to commit to drafting, but happy to say that we're looking for folks to take on a short section, knowing that not everyone's here.
Yeah, that would be helpful. So I don't want to, if other people have thoughts, I don't want to preempt them, but formulating in my brain is the idea that you could send it out, Claire, and you know, and maybe with the notes that you took
Yeah.
from our conversation tonight, get other feedback, you know, have them write to you directly or to you and Denise and Beverly or some, you know, some subset, just again, open meeting laws and all that. But get some more feedback, and then we could recirculate it and have like a more clear, like, what are the sections that we are thinking need, you know, and like how long they might be, and some, just like a little bit more. I don't know if maybe we should have like a quick small group get together after you get after you get feedback. Maybe we should have like a small group gather and do like a revision. Maybe your same group could get back together and just like incorporate the feedback and send it back out, and then have in that send out, hey, who wants to do, who's interested in any of these sections, and have like a little bit of a sign up, like, first draft, no pressure, just do your best. You know, if you feel moved, just write it, and it does not need to be perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to, I'll send out a copy where, including the comments I put in. Also, if we have the minutes ready in the next couple days, we could send those out as well, and then maybe give folks a week, 2 weeks. And I'm happy to be the point person to collect feedback and compile it into a document. Feels like there's no harm in me just saying, if you're interested, please let me know, with or without comments. And yeah, happy to circle up. I'm happy to take on a couple short sections. I probably can't commit to some of that, but yeah, happy to either plug gaps or.
Yeah. And then also, you know, asking if there are people who have no capacity for writing, but really want to be involved in reviewing and editing. Because I know for some people that's more comfortable, and that will help us get more of like a diversity of feedback and opinions on what we're putting out there.
Yeah.
That would be another role where like you're like, I have no time to write, or I don't feel I'm a good writer or whatever. But happy to review anything you write. That's often my role in our company. So yeah, that would be another big pro. So yeah, I think getting it back out there, giving people 2 weeks, is 2 weeks too long? I don't know. I know we want to try to turn things around pretty quickly, and when you send an email and you give people 2 weeks, they often just don't do it. Yeah. So I don't know if we want to say like, so
sorry, to clarify, when you say 2 weeks, do you mean 2 weeks to sign up, or 2 weeks to finish
to review it and to review and provide feedback?
I'm happy to send a reminder after a week. I don't know if we're talking about capacity. I know sometimes a week.
Oh, I know.
Short notice if you already have a full schedule. So
yeah, yeah, I'm either way, I'm happy. But yeah, I'm also trying to think about like our hopefully getting to having some things written and having something kind of more or less ready to review towards the end of the month and getting something in front of the committee by the next meeting in early December. That just I'm trying to think about that timeline if we wanted to finalize. And I don't know how crucial that timing is. Like if we could do so because I didn't draft this like this timeline per se. And I don't remember exactly what the timing is for all of the drafting. So Sophie, I don't know if you recall off the top
Here,
of
why
your
don't I can share my screen in the agenda of basically what we were proposing.
yeah. So that's what I was reading earlier. Do you know if this timeline was strictly based on the like the timeline that the whole climate action plan is on, this whole idea of having something um ready to discuss, like a full draft ready in January?
Correct.
Okay. So okay. So this is what we're talking about.
And really,
And
it's even
we'll
getting
approve it in February. Got it.
in by February. So the idea is that some really rough draft paragraphs would be drafted in time for the December meeting, right?
Yeah, what I'm getting from this is like drafting some things, also getting more information from other subcommittees by our next meeting in December, and
Yeah.
incorporating those and having something, a rough draft, like a more complete rough draft with everything assembled in January for our meeting in January, and then um, get feedback and approve something in February.
Correct.
So yeah, that feels ambitious, but I also think we can do it. So there will, if things emerge that are new information that we definitely want to include, that's not like the last time we can ever add anything to this chapter.
Right.
But yeah, so that's why I was like 2 weeks to give feedback on the outline might push us too far.
I
That's
think
why I
that
was like,
might be a little too much. I think we want to get people able to drafting pretty quickly.
yeah, so like
Okay.
getting feedback from people within a week, which should hopefully give people a little bit of flex time. Like there's some time during that week that they can review it. And maybe a reminder midweek. And then also at the same time starting to collect people who are like, I would love to write this, or okay, if no one else will, I'll do it. Whatever kind of volunteer they want to be, and figure out who's going to write what, and the final revision of the outline that would give a little time to like assemble all of that, get a final version, get people on board to write different sections, and then do the another little revision with smaller groups, and then weave in things from other subcommittees and have something that's pulled together more or less to review for everybody by January.
Yeah, so Kelly, were you saying that in addition to asking for feedback on the outline within a week, that we also want to have people volunteer for different sections within a week?
I think we could start collecting volunteers, but I don't think that needs to be with it. I think we can have, because I think some people might want to see the final outline, and
Right.
then they might realize what they want to talk to. But I mean, it's a solid outline as it stands. And so assuming it's not going to change drastically, if someone's already like, ooh, I want to write that chapter or that paragraph, then like I don't want to hold them back, right? And it's also a good way to give people a heads up, like as you're thinking about this, think about what you might want to write. So I think we could start
Mhm.
collecting volunteers for different sections, but not have like I think that could be 2 weeks out to give time to collect feedback, review the feedback, revise the outline proposal, and then people can be drafting.
I
Does
guess
that
That makes sense.
seem
I
reasonable?
just wanna flag that one of the weeks between now and our next meeting is Thanksgiving week. So I know many people may be traveling. So if we don't have writing assignments for the next, I guess if the intention is to have sections drafted at the next subcommittee meeting and the pushback on feedback for 2 weeks, I would say the same would apply for writing assignments, because then nobody knows what they're writing until 2 weeks
Yeah.
before the subcommittee, including the Thanksgiving holiday. So that just feels
Mhm.
really tight.
Yeah, that's a
from a
good point.
capacity
And that,
perspective.
yeah, and that was part of my thought of like, if we give people 2 weeks to respond, then we're, so, I mean, I guess Claire, my question would be, how much time do you think you and the other folks who drafted this would need to take in the feedback from people and make a new version of the outline?
Well, I can't speak for Denise and Beverly
I
because
know, I know,
they're not
no, you
here.
can't.
I mean, if it was like one person's task, like I collect all the feedback and I
Mhm.
create a master outline that reflects at least that in comments, it would probably take a day or two. I could mark, if I knew when that was coming, could try and like
Yeah.
mark the time off. I think it would potentially, I could work with Denise and Beverly to try and schedule a meeting. But I don't want to speak for them since they're
Yeah.
not here about what their schedules are.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So if you got feedback and, any initial volunteers for writing between now and a week from now, and then maybe could plan a meeting and get people reviewing the next draft of this outline and, with feedback in it and volunteering their writing like the week of the 18th. So that's like a week and a half from now. I don't know if that would be doable, but that would keep us on task, or on track. I just
Yeah, I can certainly reach out to them. That feels like a lot to me to like
yeah,
get all the feedback, meet again, draft, meet again, and that's
yeah,
before the next subcommittee meeting. But if we can be flexible
yeah,
and what we can accomplish, we can just
yeah.
see what we can get done.
This is a tough season with like so many things happening. Trying to plan these things. So, I mean, my thought is I'd love to get this part done sooner rather than later so that we can take more time for the writing, because I feel like that's the part that deserves the most time and thoughtfulness. So, um, but having the outline is going to give us the sense of what, breaking it up into manageable chunks, right? So that's important too. So, um, Danielle, I don't think the outline was shared by email yet. It probably should be connected to something because it's like, right, should it be shared somewhere as a public document?
Yeah, I'm happy to send it out either. Well, probably not after this meeting, but first thing tomorrow morning, happy to do that.
That'd be great.
But yeah, and then maybe I can work with Sophie to get a copy of it posted on the
Yeah.
website for this meeting.
Okay. So yeah, do other people feel differently about just like, let's see how soon we can get to drafting so that we can spend more time on that and really try to give it the attention it deserves, not feel rushed on the actual production. So like getting feedback within a week, getting a revised outline and signups in the next few days after that, and getting people set up to write and giving them like a couple weeks, including the Thanksgiving week, to work on it before the December meeting.
I think that generally sounds okay. I think we should just ask people to give us indications of what they might be interested in writing when they provide feedback, so that once we,
Yes.
Beverly and Denise and I meet or correspond, like folks just like we can just effectively say like this is who's doing what. I think that will just speed up the process.
Agreed.
And then also allow us to flag like where there are gaps, and maybe if there's gaps, there's a section we could like work on at the next subcommittee meeting as like a work to fill. But otherwise I think that sounds good. I can reach out to Denise and Beverly and see what their schedules are like and try and turn something around as quickly as possible.
Awesome. I love that. Yes. And I think if anyone has a particular interest, yes, like say it right up, you know, that'll be when we send the thing out, give us feedback and what do you particularly want, and then you'll know where you might need to ask for extra help too. So.
Yeah. And I did see in the chat, at least Mona, I'll make sure, and maybe Alex, we're interested in reviewing. So I'll make sure that we note that, and maybe when we send out sections, we can also know who's on task to review once we have a full draft, and Matthew as well.
Yes, thanks for everybody who's willing to help out with that. So, agenda, where did my agenda go? We're right at the time we set for public comment. Are we ready to move into that? Yeah. Okay. So, yes, this is the time we set aside for public comment. So, if you are a member of the public and you would like to share anything with us, this is your time. And you are welcome to turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable and would like to do that. And since we don't have a huge group, feel free to just unmute if you want to, or raise a hand, whatever works. And also, no one needs to comment. And we have a couple of students who are just serving.
Yeah, hi. Ilinka,
Hi.
yeah, thank you so much for this. I'm just kind of curious, kind of coming out of my group, like, what sort of projects has the Just Transition Subcommittee worked on in the past? And how do you apply like a just transition lens to like existing Vermont legislation, or any feedback to what others are doing in the state?
That's a good question. I can take a first stab at it. So we as a group don't necessarily look at existing legislation, because our main purpose is to serve the Climate Council, which is then creating the climate action plan. So that's our main reason for being. The biggest project was creating the guiding principles for a just transition, which was developed by this subcommittee and then incorporated into the climate action plan. And also other groups in Vermont have used that as inspiration, which is kind of cool to see. So that was our biggest project. And then the sort of ongoing work that we're doing is helping with making sure that we have really good public engagement and we're getting good feedback from the public, and helping to support the other subcommittees of the Climate Council and the Climate Council as a whole with their work in embedding equity in everything that they do. So that'd be my short answer to what we do. And then, yeah, as far as looking at equity in existing legislation and things like that, that's not exactly in our wheelhouse. I mean, could be in our wheelhouse, not in our area of responsibility, but there are other groups in the state that do that. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything or correct me.
And I don't think I'd add other than I think where the guiding principles, well, I don't know if I hear my dog barking, just being right back now, but good. I mean, we've definitely developed it as something that implementers could use as they like take recommendations from the CAP, the existing one or the one that will be written as they kind of develop the programs or consider. So I definitely couldn't speak to how everyone does that. I know I work for the Department of Public Service. I've certainly used it as like a reference for questions to ask as we think through programs or policy recommendations. There may be others in the like state government realm of implementation, but yeah. And I know Callie is here. I know some of our regional planning commissions use it kind of as a guide as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. Just as a quick follow-up, what would you consider like a successful public engagement, or have you had an example in the past?
That's a great question. I think my thought of the most successful one I've been a part of was Sophie. I mentioned it at the beginning of this meeting, and Sophie was there helping to organize this, but getting to hear from a whole bunch of community leaders in the New American and former refugee communities down in Winooski, and getting to hear from them and hear their stories and struggles and what does climate change mean? What does the climate action plan mean? And just hearing from them and being able to really take in those stories and take them back to what work we're doing. I thought that was incredibly productive for the short time I was there. It was a longer session, so I don't know, Sophie, if you had any reflections on that, or if anyone else has other like really great public engagement events that they were part of.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, Ilinka. I work for the Climate Action Office, so I'm not actually a member of this subcommittee. Along with two other folks here, my role is staff support, and my role at the Climate Action Office is community engagement focused and communication, so it's mostly been on the engagement front. And I would say a success that actually the Just Transitions subcommittee championed for was the fact that engagement needs a staff person to do it, and we also have a contract where there are people with paid hours to work on engagement, and there not only are those people who I have the honor of working with who used to be on some used to be on the Just Transition subcommittee, so they have extensive knowledge and expertise and relationships themselves, and we strive to like element with the core principles of community engagement, which is this lovely document that just got finalized, but it's been around in draft form for a couple years, and that came out of the environmental justice law a couple of years ago. So being able to systematize the engagement work and create structure and make sure people are supported, not only to do that work, but also being able to pay people, especially when we're talking about frontline community members, to show up and be part of that engagement, because it is work. I commend the Just Transition Subcommittee and the Council for, emphasizing that was a need, and understanding that there was the underlying structure and systems is really important to that. So that's, yeah. And then in terms of like specific events, I'd be happy to send you. We put out these quarterly reports now that are our way of summarizing all the things we do. And so if you're interested in digging into some of those stories and hearing what people are saying on the ground, through our work getting out and talking to people. I'd be really happy to share with us with you.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want, Alinka, do you want to drop your email in the chat and I'll follow up with you that way?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your questions. Well, that's lovely. We have a little bit more time, so I don't know if anybody else is here from the public and wants to share or ask questions. And Carrie is still here, but on iPhone. Okay. Not seeing anybody jumping off mute or raising hands, I think we can move on to the last section of our meeting. So basically, I mean, we had it sort of broken out as like, you get 5 minutes to talk about your experiences as liaison, but we don't really have everybody from all the subcommittees. So I would just say anybody who's a liaison, we'd love to hear what your experience has been. You know, have you had any questions, concerns, if there were issues that have come up that you think our subcommittee should talk about, or that we should bring somebody from the other subcommittee here to talk about it. Just anything. This is your time. And so I think, let's see. And then following that conversation, we'd like to just talk about, like, as a group, what we can do to support people, to support the other subcommittees and the liaisons. So let's see. So Danielle, Callie, you're both liaisons, right? And Claire, you're on science and data. Is that right? Okay, so I think we have 3 out of 4 subcommittee liaison representation. Am I missing anybody? I'm good, right? Nobody else is a liaison. Okay. So Callie, would you like to start and share, or just to call you out?
Sorry, I switched my lighting around and now I'm like really washed out over here. Yeah, so I am the liaison for the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. They have recently had their public input sessions. I think the buildings and thermal and transportation were both led by put on by the cross-sector mitigation. I'm not exactly sure how to phrase that. I wasn't able to go to the buildings and thermal one, but I did go to the transportation input session that was today. And I thought that was a pretty good conversation. There were a lot of people on sharing their perspectives, like a landlord, you know, people who are in the transit and microtransit realm, people from the deaf community. So that was, you know, a really, I think, good conversation, good discussion. There's a lot that, you know, could be impacted by federal changes with, you know, things related to like EV incentives and Vermont's participation in clean cars. So that does kind of put things up in the air a little bit. And was part of the discussion today, is, you know, kind of some uncertainty around how that is going to play out. The committee is going to be starting to meet more often. I just got a slew of calendar invites. It looks like they're going to be weekly meetings now. In addition, I think there are still several task groups meeting, and Sam would probably be able to provide a lot more detail because she's on, I think, 2 of the task groups. So in addition to the weekly meetings, I don't know how often the task groups are meeting. And then the cross sector also formed these like cross-cutting groups that, again, I'm not really sure. Sophie and Liz probably know more about like how those fit into the structure, and you could maybe help me here, but there were 2 groups that, like, they're not task groups, or there's some sort of subgroup that's come out of cross sector that are looking at cross-cutting issues in its workforce and compact settlement, and maybe there's one that I'm missing. And so there's been 2 compact settlement meetings, and I think there's another one. And I think again, that's meant to look at some of these like cross-cutting solutions and which ones or actions and strategies. Sorry, I'm getting my language mixed up a little bit at the end of the day. And deciding, sort of prioritizing which of those cross-cutting actions should be prioritized and advanced. Liz, I don't know if you can speak more intelligently to sort of those 2 offshoot groups.
I know you got there where there's 3 cross-cutting groups, education, workforce development, and compact settlement. And so yeah, they touch the different 3 drafting subcommittees. So there's representatives from each subcommittee on these 3 cross-cutting groups. There's been a couple of meetings for each so far, and there's going to be a 3rd meeting for education and workforce and education and compact settlement. And yeah, so that's ongoing, that work. And they are starting to kind of to share that information at the input sessions, that these are ongoing work that touches the 3 different subcommittees.
And I believe those task groups or working groups or whatever they're called, they are not just members of cross-sector mitigation. They're like members from different subcommittees working together.
Correct. Yeah. So it's representatives from each of the 3 drafting subcommittees. So cross-sector, ag, and rural resilience are all represented. It's public meetings, so anyone's welcome to attend these meetings. And yeah, it's just because these topics they're not siloed, right? So that's why it's cross-cutting in this way. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to someone yesterday and was like, oh, compact settlement, great. Let's put them all near the rivers where it's gonna flood. Oh no, that's bad for resilience. It's good for transportation. Yeah. So gotta talk
yeah.
together.
Yeah, so those meetings, so some of them are in the process of being scheduled for the next meeting, but they're usually on our public calendar. So if anyone would ever like to join them, they're welcome to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only other thing, I think it's helpful that there are 2 of us as cross-sector liaisons. I don't know if the other ones have 2 or if it's just ours, but I think that's a good call because now that the meetings are weekly, that's a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
plus these meetings.
And
So
happens there. Yeah.
yeah. And Sam is probably doing double to triple the amount of meetings because she's on the 2 task groups. And I think she's on the compact settlement cross-cutting group with me too. So it's a lot of meetings, I'm not gonna lie. So I think it's good that there is more than one liaison, and honestly in the future, if this structure is implemented again, maybe even a 3rd one for cross-sector, because it seems like I don't know how it compares to the other 2 drafting committees, but cross-sector has been extremely active, and there's a lot of time commitment being asked of everyone involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's also there are the 3 sections also, because I was a liaison to that subcommittee and at the first round. So I see Sophie's hand, and I also have a question for you, Callie, but go ahead, Sophie.
Yeah, just thought that's really good feedback, Callie, and maybe we should make note of that in the just transition section when discussing the liaisons and how that went, that having 2 was a good model. I think we'd originally had Kelsey on Ag and Eco, and then she had to leave the subcommittee. And I think, Danielle, you had Anna with you, and Anna's stepped back for a moment. So I think that was the original intention. So that's interesting to kind of hear your positive feedback on that. And then maybe from Danielle or Abby, it'll be interesting to hear, is it more challenging to just be one person? And maybe we incorporate how that went into the chapter for posterity.
Another thing though that this was brought up, I think it must have been at the steering committee meeting. Cross sector already has a ton of members, and liaisons since they are counted as members, they count towards quorum. And so we could potentially have an issue where it's like, if you're not all attending, if we have 3 liaisons from our subcommittee, and they're not attending regularly the main meetings, it messes up the quorum thing. So we could also potentially just have them on the task groups if that's like a drafting period, right? And the task
Yeah.
groups are not that active except at this like crunch time, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it would be kind of, I wonder if there is ever a way to like have just transition liaisons not be like full members that count towards quorum on the subcommittee. I mean, maybe that's not legislatively, bureaucratically possible. Maybe it's
you
not,
could be there,
but
you could be there as not a full member, but then you also wouldn't get the full $50 per diem.
oh, okay. I mean, I'm not accepting the per diem. So I did, yeah, for that purpose, yeah, I can totally see that making sense.
Yeah.
Somebody, but I think
like,
just aside from that, which acknowledging that it kind of puts some added pressure on attending when you know that like it counts towards quorum.
Absolutely. No,
and I don't think I knew that when I like had said I would be a liaison. I didn't realize that like that's probably just my bad that I didn't realize that it meant full membership counting towards quorum. So
no, and that makes sense. And that's definitely been a confusion, but also from like an equity perspective, I want to make sure like, I mean, I've been pushing for that, just to like, if you're a liaison, you're a member, because if you're going to this meeting and you're attending and participating, you should be eligible for the per diem, even if you're not taking it, and no questions asked. So that was not mine solely, but other people have also asked for that. But yes, if there's a need to lighten the burden and have someone else, and someone else is like, I don't care, I don't need can attend and give feedback, and that's fine. You don't have to necessarily be a full member. It does get a little bit funny with like the public meeting thing, but I think once you're recognized as a liaison, you can sort of be there and not have to be a member of the public watching the meeting. But I don't think that's like a legal, like a public meeting law thing. As a procedural thing. So, Liz, do you have something to add to that, or okay. I didn't know if you're going on camera to say something. Okay, so Callie, my question for you was just, have there been any issues that have come up where you think we should definitely talk about them in our subcommittee, or you weren't sure how to, anything that you've noticed that you think our subcommittee could benefit from hearing about further, or talking to people from cross sector or from the task groups to work through? Like, are there any equity things that have come up that you want to talk about further at another time, or now?
Yeah, sorry, I feel I'm looking at my phone, but only because Sam and I had exchanged some messages about something, and I was just she had brought up something at a meeting we were both at, and was like flagged something, and I'm just trying to see if I can find it, but because it was sorry, I can, if I find it I can chime in later, but I don't want
fine. It doesn't need to be now. Totally. If nothing is like top of mind and you're just looking for something, we can also circle back to it. Or we could, you could send an email and we can coordinate. Maybe if there's like also inviting members of the subcommittees you're liaison to one of our meetings, and like that is totally an option. We just want to plan ahead and book time for them, but this subcommittee can be accounted for. So
I mean, I think big picture, a lot of it is just like around affordability. Like, I think that just really, that's a big top of mind for like a lot of Vermonters. And I think, that's something that, sorry, upstairs neighbors bowling apparently up there. And, came up a lot in transportation today too, of like, not everyone's going to be able to afford an electric vehicle. So that like that just kind of running trend throughout
Yeah.
all of that, I think is, something that should be top of all the subcommittees' minds, is just like the affordability and the financial impact to, all Vermonters, but with a specific focus on, more, lower income or marginalized, people. But that's just a very general one though.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. And if you find the message and you want to bring it up later in the meeting, circle back, or as I said, an email or something if that seems more appropriate. Matthew, is it a quick thing? Because I did want to make sure we heard from the other liaisons. But
Yeah, it's very, very quick. Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. It's, affordability also extends to rural communities and individuals with disabilities. We got to put that in perspective view. Not everybody drives, and especially out here in rural towns, so you got to add that perspectivity of affordability, but also accessibility and availability, because all three of those go hand in hand. If you don't have a flexibility, then you don't have availability, then you don't have accessibility, which it comes to that, then that's the three, biggest key factors of survival in Vermont. And like I said, affordability intersects all those. If you don't have it, then the support system fails as a whole together. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. You nailed it. Yeah. I don't have anything to say to that, except yes, thank you. Danielle, are you ready to give us any thoughts you've had?
Sure. I'd say one of the challenges that I've had as a liaison is the time of this meeting being in the middle of the day. I was really only able to attend the two since I became a liaison, and both were like, they're doing a lot. It was extremely overwhelming. This group has 3 task groups and like 80 action items. And so trying to think about applying just transition principles to like every action item, some of them being very broad, was kind of daunting. So I'm trying to figure out how to go about that task. I know that right coming back after their 2 input sessions this month and meeting again, so probably with some more specific recommendations for the group to review, and hopefully I can see them early, because I think Claire mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, I need a second to review things. Like if I'm presented with something in the meeting, I have a hard time immediately coming up with a response. But that's the goal, and I'm trying to make some of the task group meetings as well, but it's a challenge.
And you're liaison with rural resilience and adaptation, is that right?
Yes, sorry. Yep.
Yeah. I was cheating looking at the chart, but for those of us playing at home, they are doing, and I tuned in a little bit when you were there in person. You did a great job, by the way, talking about the just transition guiding principles and all of the things that we were working on. Danielle totally nailed it, and I was there as potential backup just in case, and I was like, she got it.
I think the group itself has had some focus on equity. It sounds like in their conversations, it's something they think about, but in, like, bringing it to the surface of each of these recommendations, the work still needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that's true across the board from my conversations in other subcommittees, is that people are very much wanting to center equity in what they're doing. And I think the stumbling block is not necessarily knowing how, or not necessarily knowing what the frontline and impacted communities are dealing with. And so that's why, getting to hear stories directly from people, I think is so powerful and so helpful. All right, let's see. Okay, that sounds very complex. Okay, sorry. There was something about distributed utilities passing along the costs of upgrading failing infrastructure and recovery efforts to ratepayers. Okay. That is a concern. That sounds concerning, Kelly. Cool. Yeah, that's something we could maybe dig into at some point. You know, that's and that's also like I was just when it comes to equity, people don't always think about the like incentive versus like who's incentivized by incentives and how do they or like a tax cut isn't really helpful if you don't make enough money to owe taxes. Right? Um and a fee to help cover something isn't really helpful and if you can't afford to pay for that thing in the first place. And it's like um the way we structure these different practices to help with climate change, a little tiny nuance can make a big impact on some of the communities that we're trying to help support and uplift. And it might not be obvious to people who aren't in that lived experience.
Yeah, I think the context of which I get, yeah, it's kind of a complex issue, but I think the context of what we were talking about is, you know, with increase in flooding and like the still recovery efforts of the past two floods still underway, like when there's major damage to like grid infrastructure and stuff like that, and like, you know, utilities like Green Mountain Power and whoever have to go out and fix that, like, you know, those costs are, you know, in some way being, you know, passed off to ratepayers. And you know, even if it's like a flat increase to all ratepayers, like, which I don't know enough about to know how that works, like people make different incomes, so it's not going to affect everybody equally. So I think that was raised as a concern of like just the increasing need to, you know, rebuild infrastructure after climate related disasters could, you know, lead to higher prices in a variety of ways, including this way through to ratepayers. So I think that was the context of the conversation. If anyone's, you know, curious more about it, could reach out to Sam because I don't want to speak completely for her, but yeah.
Thank you. No, that's thanks for the context. That's really helpful. Yeah. Okay, Danielle, was there anything else and any other like any particular issues that you think our subcommittee should look at further that you've noticed in the couple of things you've
I wouldn't say any particular issue in general. I'm just reading through a lot of the strategies and actions now as we're talking. And I guess there's a lot of things related to like increase funding to this area or provide investment in this area. And how do you ensure that that funding and investment would be equitable once it's established? That would be kind of my question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because
And
it's not
also,
written into their plan. It's just increased funding to this area. And then someone takes it from there.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that, like, definitely I would say like raise that at a meeting if it seems like the right time, but also if people are
what did you find out about this?
if people are struggling also with any issues where they're like, I want this to be equitable, but I don't know how. And again, extend the invitation. Let's bring them here. You know, let them reach out to our subcommittee. That's what we're here for. And we don't want liaisons to feel like you're out there solo trying to answer all the questions and be the sole source of all the knowledge about equity, because that's not anything anyone can do. So yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Danielle. Claire, I think you're the other person. I don't know if science and data is like an interesting one because they're more of like collecting information and less of writing recommendations probably, but is there anything from your role there that you want to share?
Yeah, science and data is similar to just transitions in that it is not a drafting committee. We have not met in at least the last couple months. And actually, one of the co-chairs recently had to step down and he's moving to a different position. So I think there's still an outstanding question of who one of the co-chairs will be. That said, so yeah, so this is kind of an interesting space in terms of how it intersects with just transitions work. The last time we met, some of the like big projects we talked about were the measuring and assessing progress tool, which the Climate Action Office it's a requirement of the GWSA. That is a project that's just getting off the ground and will definitely have, I think, connections to the subcommittee with regards to thinking about metrics, tracking progress towards meeting the goals. And then some of the more technical modeling that informs things like what conversations having in cross vector. But yeah, so it's sort of been in a holding pattern the last couple months. So we haven't talked about kind of the tool, which also doesn't necessarily align with the mission of science and data. But I think, yeah, the measuring and assessing progress tool as the subcommittee receives updates around that may be an interesting intersection point to think about kind of what can be pulled from the just transitions guiding principles in terms of how we think about metrics. But that project again is just kind of kicking off and hasn't actually been talked about at the subcommittee level. So yeah, the short update from science and data. But yeah, more to come hopefully.
No, it's cool to, I mean, I think there might be opportunities to work with them because I know that they can work with data about like the municipal vulnerability index, right? Which is like talks about who are the most frontline impacted areas, like who's most vulnerable in climate disasters and things like that. So there's definitely some potential that we could, work with them on something, or it might be less of them asking feedback from us and us saying, hey, can you dig into this further? But I know they're doing a lot and trying to update with the latest data from the last 4 years that we didn't have last time around. So cool. Thank you. Thanks, Claire. That was helpful. So I guess the last little bit here was on our agenda was to talk about, any supports you need as liaisons. And I think we kind of touched on that a little bit, but is there anything else that other than, open invitation to have members of other subcommittees come to this meeting and talk through things with us, just give us a week's notice, or for something really time sensitive or procedure based or whatever, they can also write to co-chairs and try to get like a quick feedback, but we don't want to speak for the whole subcommittee on serious matters. And then of course, as liaisons, anytime there's a concern or something you want to bring up, bring it to the subcommittee, ask your co-chairs, like, if you want, what's appropriate. Like that's the other thing is what's the procedure. That's what Abby and I are here for, and Sophie and Claire and Carrie are also super supportive and helpful people. But is there anything else that we could be doing to help you feel supported and like you have the ability to be effective in your role as liaison? Go ahead.
Is there a way, is there a way to solicit feedback from other just transition subcommittee members on something specific that doesn't trigger like public meeting?
Yeah. So if you wanted to like have a quick one-on-one conversation, if you reach out to one or two people from this subcommittee, that's not public meeting law. If you want something that's not a part of the public record for some reason, like it was really sensitive, you know,
No, I mean,
information.
just for
Yeah.
feedback purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, an email or a phone call or something is fine so long as it's not to everybody in our subcommittee. If you just want to touch base and talk about things. And a phone call is a good way to just check in with somebody and talk things through. So those are options. Yeah, especially if there's like someone in particular on our subcommittee who you think might have a perspective on something that you're hearing and wondering about, then, you know, ask that person or those people. And then so long as it's not at least half of our subcommittee, it doesn't,
Okay.
it's not a public meeting, right?
Okay.
And so, yeah, and that's a good, like, you know, we want things to be transparent. So it's part of the public record if someone wants a record search, if you write it in an email, but that's like a good way to have some conversations and be able to work things out. And yeah, and again, if something's like super sensitive and confidential, like somebody's personal life or something, then don't put it in an email. But yeah, that would be a good way to talk things through and not have to bring it to the full meeting necessarily. Because I know some of these things can be kind of tough and not something you necessarily feel comfortable talking about in a public recorded meeting. And that's totally understandable.
There's also such a real thing of efficiencies too, where like these meetings are all staggered. It's like, oh, if I have this thing in my mind and I want to talk about it right now with somebody while it's fresh, but the Just Transitions meeting isn't until 3 weeks from now. So I think there's a very valid also utility of having one-on-one or small group conversations for the immediacy of the process and keeping things efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Callie, Danielle, Claire, anybody else? You know, and if there are things that come up also afterwards, if you're thinking about this, I would say especially Danielle and Callie in your roles, and there are things that come up and you want to send an email or whatever, that's also great. I think I'm not super great on my email, but I do try to notice, and Sophie's good at also texting me if I'm not responding to something fast enough. Thanks, Sophie. So yeah, we're definitely want to make sure that things are going well. And having been a liaison myself in the past, it's not super easy to know what to do and when. And I think it sounds like you're doing great. You're doing great, both of you. So, but yeah, anything you feel like we can do to support, I'd be there. So, any last things? We could possibly end a couple minutes early if there's nothing else on anybody's mind. Cool. So yeah, I think so. Our next meeting will be scheduled for the first Thursday in December, I believe. And between now and then, we'll give feedback to Claire and her team and get the revised thing and do some writing. And then hopefully we'll have some cool stuff to review in December. But until then, thank you all so much. Thank you, guests, for being here. I appreciate that. And it was nice to see everybody on the subcommittee and hear your thoughts and feedback.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.